He swore to tell the truth, looked a judge in the eye and spun a story that painted me drunk, dangerous, and reaching for a weapon. I never had. The jurors leaned in. The prosecutor smiled like the ending was already written, and I sat there with a tender cheek where a badge had pressed me into my own hood, thinking, keep going, stack your lies high, I know exactly how this tower falls. When he finished smirking, I stood up slow, slid a leather wallet from my blazer and said, not yet, Your Honor. But that moment only makes sense if I take you back to the first flash of red and blue that turned my quiet drive home into a crash course in who belongs where. It was one of those warm Texas nights where the air feels like heavy cloth. Stonebridge was yawning itself to sleep, and my matte blue electric crossover hummed like a lullaby. 2 turns from Cedar Bend and the house I worked a lifetime to afford. Then the cruiser lit me up, and I did what my father taught me before I learned multiplication. Signal pull over under a streetlight. Hands at 10 and 2. Breathe from the belly and tell your voice to behave. Boots approached with the slow confidence of a man who thinks the sidewalk reports to him. The sergeant leaned into my window and squinted like my face was a riddle he could bully into an answer. License and registration, he said, and before I could even ask what for, he followed it with, where are you headed in this neighborhood? Like neighborhood was a password. I didn't know the name on his chest, read Sergeant Travis Kincaid, and the way he circled my car felt less like safety and more like ownership. I said what you're supposed to say when the script is stacked against you. Good evening, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop? And he said I smell alcohol, which would have been a neat trick. Given the strongest thing in my cup holder was spearmint gum, I told him calmly. I didn't consent to a search, and he didn't blink. Step out, he repeated. And I took that slow 5-count breath where you decide to be your own attorney because you can't afford not to be. I unlocked the door and stepped into the moth-thick light. He asked where I live, and I said Cedar Bend, second mailbox on the right. Really? He laughed. Folks there usually have drivers, and I said, I prefer to drive myself, which must have rubbed some part of his pride raw because he popped my passenger door without permission and started rifling the glove box. I said, please don't search my car, and his answer was to grip my wrist, spin me into the hood, and narrate to the air resisting, like he was placing a mobile order for a charge that hadn't happened. The metal hummed under my cheek, my eyes burned because surprise I'm not a statue, and in the back seat of his cruiser I turned my wrist just enough to wake my watch and tapped a pattern I could do in my sleep phase 2, which is the quiet way of saying this won't disappear the way you think it will. On the radio ride, he built the usual myth in a voice meant for tape: female subject, belligerent, suspected DUI, possible narcotics. He knew the phrases that make strangers nod. You know what I mean? The kind of phrases that walk into rooms first and decide who's believable. At the station, they took my laces like I was a threat to myself, but left me my patience. I sat in a holding room where the fluorescent light flickered like a bad conscience and listened to the rhythm of his report through the wall. Drunk, uncooperative, reached toward glove box, feared for my safety, the chorus he'd practiced until it felt like truth in his own mouth. Meanwhile, my phone, my watch, and a little network of people who care more about evidence than ego started to hum. My son Miles never panics. He exhales and types, he's 14 and tall and too smart for the flimsy excuses adults make when they don't want to say prejudice out loud. He'd built a quiet app called Porchlight that listened to public scanners and mapped traffic stops within 2 miles of our block. His screen pinged my plate number and he whispered, "Seriously, Mom?" Then routed himself into the nearest traffic camera, mirrored the feed into 3 servers he named Peanut Pretzel and Popcorn, because justice can have a sense of humor. He clipped, saved, time-stamped, and backed up every second, like he was building a boat for when the flood of glitches came. Yeah, that happened. Day 1 in court is theater. The prosecutor wore a tie that said country before nuance and walked the sergeant through the greatest hits. Did you smell alcohol? Yes. Did she reach yes? Was your body cam? Recording it malfunctioned. Jurors nodded like the story knew their names. My public defender, Allison Park, young and running in 3 directions because the system likes its defenders tired, stood up brave. Anyway, Sergeant, did you perform a sobriety test? Of course, he said, with the kind of smile that hides contempt. She failed to maintain balance, slurred speech, refused to comply. She sat down, searching for a trapdoor that wasn't there. Judge Clarence Boone rubbed his chin and looked at me, the way an old man looks at a rerun he wishes would end differently. This time we broke for lunch with 2 hours to locate a miracle I didn't order one. I followed a plan. In the hallway by a wheezing soda machine, I called a number that only answers when it matters. This is Ellison Authorization Delta 6, open file, S11 full extraction pull, every perjury complaint tied to Kincaid and cross-reference with vendor contracts for Sentry Vault Systems, which is a name you don't know unless you've tried to figure out why essential footage keeps corrupting across town in a mechanic's lot with a roof that rattles during storms. Rafael Ortega opened his laptop. He'd had a small drone up near the intersection to deter thieves, and it caught a sliver of light and shadow that looked like nothing until he cleaned the audio and stabilized the picture. He watched it twice, whispered, "Got him," then sent it to a drive with my initials and said a prayer for careful hands. That night, my dining table looked like a command post because sometimes I opened a DOJ briefcase with my thumb and laid out the kind of paper that shifts a room: complaint summaries, subpoena drafts, a consent decree, proposal that needed a judge's signature, and a town's will. Miles showed up in the doorway with hair that looked like curiosity had mussed it, and a small drive between his fingers. They didn't delete the body cam. They masked it with a military module and hid it under maintenance logs. I rebuilt the metadata chain and let AI fill the corrupted frames. You can hear him. You can see his hand. We watched the clip over lukewarm pizza rolls. The cruiser lights raked my car. My hands were visible. His voice said, "You people think you can just buy your way into this neighborhood." The shove landed again in my stomach, and Miles, bless him, didn't try to fix that kind of hurt with words. He slid the drive into a padded envelope already addressed to a place in Washington that doesn't lose things. I wrote an email to the Civil Rights Division. Phase 3 activation perjury confirmed video attached crosscheck. All active Kincaid cases execute federal arrest protocol on site if judge concurs. Then I made 3 folders on my desktop: public record evidence contingency. The last on a 12-hour fuse that would send the whole truth to outlets big and small because the small ones still remember how to read close to midnight. An encrypted ping hit my phone. Warrant drafted, judge reviewing, sleep if you can. I didn't. I watched my town sleep and promised it something better. Morning in Texas can glare like judgment. The courthouse steps held reporters nursing coffee and a hunch the gallery hummed with that small-town electricity that says, "We know each other's families, but today we're going to choose a side," the bailiff called State of Texas versus Maya Ellison. The prosecutor cracked his neck. Kincaid polished the edge of his badge like it could erase yesterday. Allison squeezed my arm and whispered, "Please tell me you have something." "I have the truth," I said, and it sounded small until it didn't. Judge Boone took the bench and called the state's witness, and we watched the same bad movie. I feared for my safety, with a pause like a punctuation mark when he stepped off the stand. He brushed my chair and muttered, "You're done, lady." I surprised myself by smiling. "We'll see," I said. Then Allison stood taller and said, "Your Honor, the defense moves to admit new evidence and recall 2 witnesses." The prosecutor objected out of habit. The judge lifted a hand. "We'll hear it." The doors opened and Raphael walked in with a black case, set a compact monitor on the cart, and dimmed the lights just enough to feel the air change. The video started fuzzy, then snapped into place, because software plus stubbornness can do that. The cruiser, lights my car, my hands visible, his voice clear, the shove, the metal hum, a soft lord from the back row. Judge Boone leaned forward. "Sergeant, is that your voice?" "It's distorted," he said. "Play it again," the judge replied. "We did it. Didn't change." The second witness came in slow with a cane and a Sunday dress. "State your name," Allison said. "Evelyn Brooks," she answered. "I taught 2nd grade for 31 years. Do you recognize the man at the table?" "Yes, that one," she pointed steady. He said, "I was selling drugs out of my Buick. I was leaving choir practice, church security proved. I never left the lot, case dropped my name, didn't recover for months." The air grew heavy because truth finally outweighed convenience. Judge Boone folded his hands. "Sergeant Kincaid, this is the 2nd confirmed false arrest tied to your name in 2 years. Do you have an explanation?" His jaw worked like a man chewing pride. "People don't understand what it takes to keep order." Allison looked at him like a teacher who's heard enough order, sergeant, or control, and that's when I stood and asked to address the court. The judge studied me a beat and nodded. I walked to the front, feeling my pulse where my badge would catch the light. I held up the slim leather wallet and flipped it open. The gold seal flashed. The room breathed out like it had been holding a secret. "My name is Special Agent Dr. Maya Ellison, Civil Rights Division. United States Department of Justice. I said for 3 years, I've been investigating a pattern of civil rights violations in this department. Last night's stop was unlawful. This morning's testimony was perjury. I handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff. This is a federal arrest warrant signed by Judge Clarence Boone under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. The judge read, looked up, and said, "Confirmed." And when the bailiff stepped toward Kincaid, he exploded in a small, frightened way. "You set me up," he yelled, voice cracking like thin ice. "Sit down, Sergeant," the judge ordered. He didn't, so the bailiff helped him make a better choice. The cuffs clicked loud enough to echo, and the room went from holy quiet to noisy relief. A reporter dropped his pen. A woman in the back whispered, "Thank you, Jesus." And I stood there, not triumphant, but relieved, like someone had finally opened a window in a room that smelled wrong for years. After the hearing, the consent decree process moved fast because paper backed by proof moves mountains. Internal emails that called complaints. Nuisance chatter. Purchase orders for a Sentry Vault module that scrubbed corrupted files that were never corrupted. Only inconvenient. A map of stops clustered at the fancy gates and entry roads where names like mine got questioned first. Judge Boone signed oversight into law 10 years with AI. Verified body cams locked to blockchain signatures, so the malfunction story retires. 24-hour public release of stop data, so patterns can't hide a civilian board chaired by the same man whose patience just changed our town. The chief resigned at breakfast, 2 captains by lunch, and the rest of us went to work. Because reform isn't confetti, it's meetings and training and choosing to show up when the cameras have left. There's a cost to telling the truth in front of people who prefer a comfortable lie. My mailbox held cookies from second graders and letters with magazine-cut threats from cowards who forget the FBI owns a map. I testified at a state hearing and said the thing that keeps getting printed on posters I didn't ask for. The problem isn't the badge, it's the belief that wearing one makes you untouchable. Miles took his porch light code and built Civic Lens, an app that streams encounters to encrypted servers with automatic timestamps and bystander face blur. 5 million downloads in 3 months. He pretended to shrug and then showed me the map like a kid waving an A in my kitchen. Technology helps truth. I told him over microwave pizza, but it doesn't replace courage. "Good thing we've got both," he said. "You know what I mean." I saw Kincaid once more in shackles thinner and gray around the eyes, surprised that the world doesn't pause for him. He pled to a stack of charges that add up to years. He will feel in his bones. He tried to catch my eye, and I let the moment pass. Not out of spite, but because whatever redemption looks like, it's a job he has to clock into. Alone, Stonebridge hired a new chief, Angela Ruiz, who hung a new motto in the lobby, "To serve truth above all." And people either rolled their eyes or cried, depending on how the last decade treated them. The numbers started to shift in boring ways that mean everything. Fewer stops without cause, fewer complaints, more warnings that end with a drive safe. And one afternoon, I watched a rookie explain a stop to a nervous white kid, hands visible, voice calm. He gave a warning and sent him home. It was almost dull, which is exactly how public safety should feel. A neighbor later muttered, "This oversight is killing their ability to work." And I could have argued, but I kept walking. Maybe both sentences can be true on different days. Maybe democracy is learning to live with that tension without using it as an excuse to look away. I went back to my father's grave on a Sunday with a low sky. He was a security guard who never carried a gun and still died of a misunderstanding that sounded a lot like policy. I touched his name and told him what we did in Stonebridge, told him the hood doesn't hum under my cheek anymore. When I think about milk after dark, told him his grandson is building guardrails with code. The wind answered the way wind does, and I took it as a yes. Months later, I stood on a stage in Atlanta under amber lights with a medal I didn't chase. I told the room it wasn't a victory, it was a consequence. And Miles stood off to the side in a jacket he borrowed from Raphael. Because growth spurts don't coordinate with ceremonies, he held up a tablet and mouthed 10 million. I laughed into a mic and said, "Let's hope one day nobody needs this." And the applause sounded hopeful and tired like all of us. So here's the part where I hand the mic back to you because that's the only way this keeps working. Tell me what you call justice. Is it a verdict, a headline, a prison number, or is it a habit we practice until people with power accept it as the only language? Did I set a trap or hold up a mirror? Should federal oversight be forever or fade, once a department proves it can police itself? Have you seen a lie become policy or a camera save a life drop? Your story in the comments, push back. If you need to argue with me and with each other, just do it in good faith, like share and subscribe. If you believe truth shouldn't have a malfunction, and if a video on your phone made your hands shake, back it up to 3 places. Name it something you'll remember. Tell someone you trust. One lie can wreck a life, but one truth can save a generation.